so if you remove that factor of I can't find a practice and you just look at what's best for me, like startup or acquisition, I always take it to, are you the type of doc that has a crystal clear vision and know exactly what kind of practice you want to create? And are you a naturally born leader? Are you good with taking the business on outside of just clinical? That is a naturally born entrepreneur type style person is going to be fit better for a startup.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode on the Happy Practice Playbook. I'm Mo Jones, and in each episode of the show, you'll hear conversations with dentists, office managers, staff, and specialists who know how to create a happy practice. Today, we're joined by Michael Dinsio, who has an MBA and is a dental consultant who has helped over 500 doctors take the leap to start, buy, and grow their own practices. He is also the co-founder of Next Level Consultants, a nationwide consulting firm, and also the host of 2 successful podcasts that are geared toward practice owners. Michael, hello and welcome to the show.
What's up? What's up? Nice to finally meet you. This is cool.
Yes, nice to meet you as well. And let me just tell you, I love every episode we do here on the Happy Practice Playbook, but I'm especially excited because we have a really exciting topic that I think is just geared to that, sole purpose of Happy Practice Playbook. And it's about practice ownership, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think all of our listeners, there'll be really great tidbits and things they can get from it. So I'm very jazzed. I'm always excited when I get to learn new things because I know nothing. So, will I ever own a dental practice? Probably not, but I will have this knowledge in case I want to now.
Yes, you will. You will. And let's make as many happy practices as possible. So that's the goal.
Yes. All right. Well, as in true Happy Practice Playbook fashion, we will start with our statistic, which today it is, according to ADA.org, practice ownership among dentists in private practice have been declining over the years, dropping from 84.7% in 2005 to 73% in 2021. So why do you think practice ownership has been declining?
Yes, this is a great question because it's a very hot topic about the whole DSO taking over the world situation. As long as I've been in dentistry and helping docs get into ownership, it's always been a concern. But I live in the world of private practice ownership, and we are as busy as it gets. So it was interesting, that statistic, because it's 11%, right? So the difference of 11%. But you said 2005 to 2021. So that's, what is that, 15 years, 16 years? Something like that? Math?
That's 16 years.
Okay, so that's 11% in 16 years. So it's less than 1% a year. It's definitely a concern for private practices that DSOs are popping up all over the place. But, I just don't see that doesn't scare me. A less than 1% difference year over year in the past 15 years. I know that private practices in general are winning with customer service and patient experience and all that. However, it's a real thing. DSO's buying power is a thing. The hours and benefits that they can offer is a real thing. So they definitely have an advantage. But just big picture, it's a scary statistic thinking that something's changed over 11%. But to me, in my everyday world, we help over 50 docs a year get into ownership, and they're all doing really well. So I don't know if I'm answering the question exactly how you would want it, but in my humble opinion, it's not as scary as that statistic sounded.
Well, and here's a follow-up question that I had. So I know,
Hmm.
like we mentioned, the statistic goes from 2005 to 2021, which, as we know, COVID-19, that pandemic hit in 2020. And so
Hmm.
my own curiosity is, I'm wondering what the statistics look like for that from 2020 to now, if
Hmm.
there is still a decline in private ownership or not. And so, or
I
if, what have
know.
you seen in your experience?
Well, it's actually been the opposite. I don't think it's a decrease. Um, I think private practice, in my experience, had a supercharge, because what I found in 2020
Mm-hmm.
was that associates were the first ones to get punched in the mouth during COVID. The owners of the practices would come back in and start working more, and dropping the associates or cutting their hours or making them do hygiene, which is a real thing today, right? And so for that reason, all the associates are like, screw this. I'm going to get into ownership. I don't now,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I don't have the statistics on that. But my guess would be it's not as bad as you think. And to parlay that, in my world, I have worked with DSOs in the consulting, on the consulting side in the firm, and going into 2022 this year, they actually have scaled back their buying projections. So I actually am seeing something shift, and I don't know if that's going to be something that's going to happen over the next 10 years, but I can tell you in this really short moment of time, I'm seeing kind of the opposite of what we're talking about. So I don't know. And also I will throw this out. It's state by state. Some states like Arizona, where anybody can own a dental office without a DDS behind their name, you're going to see those percentages way up. Where I live here in Washington, it's really difficult to buy a practice as a non-dentist. So those numbers are really low. So again, state to state, year to year, I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I would feel like just from hearing our little conversation here, it would make me feel hopeful that if I'm going to take that leap, right, to
Mm-hmm.
become a practice owner, that for the most part, there's a good projection that I will be able to be successful given that I'm, doing my due diligence and I have the right tools behind me versus,
Yes.
just jumping into something that's already a fire and it's like, regardless of what you have, it's going to suck. So
Yeah.
it doesn't sound like that's the case.
No, I thank you for saying that, because I think the story or the title, the headline should be private practice is still doing well. Okay. Sure, DSOs are buying some practices, no doubt. But I can tell you that private practice is still definitely working out well. And I don't think the banks would be willing to give money as easily as they are today if people were not doing well against the DSOs. Literally, you could go to 5 banks that I could think of, and they will give you 100% financing for a practice that you want to purchase or start with very little difficulty. So how is that? Well, because they're not failing. Bottom line.
Mhm. Well, let's further dig into this. So we'll talk about someone becoming a practice owner. I think a couple of options you have initially, right, is doing a startup or an acquisition. So, what are your thoughts on startups versus acquisitions?
Yeah. So I I get asked this question the most, like, what's best for me, or what should I do? And honestly, like, if you remove the idea of acquisitions are difficult to find, because the right acquisition, the right practice that you may want to purchase is the brokers always say, oh, you're looking for a unicorn. Like, it's not really a unicorn, but kind of is. Like, to find that right practice that fits you in the right location, doing the dentistry that you do, the type of clients, the type of vision. There has to be a lot of fits with what you're buying and what you want to buy. So if you remove that factor of I can't find a practice, and you just look at what's best for me, like a startup or acquisition, I always take it to, are you the type of doc that has a crystal clear vision and know exactly what kind of practice you want to create? And are you a naturally born leader? Are you good with taking the business on outside of just clinical? that is a naturally born entrepreneur type style person is going to be fit better for a startup. An acquisition, in my mind, you can also be what I just described, no doubt. But that's more of like a plug and play type situation. That's more of I jump in, I see what's going on here. I jump in with 2 feet. I try to win the patients over. I try to win the team over. Try not to change too much. You can definitely change some things, but like you don't want to go in guns blazing saying we're dropping all insurances or we're gonna change the name tomorrow. Like you don't want to do that in an acquisition. You want to kind of go in, not ruffle too many feathers, win the hearts and minds of team and patient, and it's more of a plug and play type situation. So you have to think, audience, you have to think what's going to fit me better and then go from there. But what I find, and sorry, I'm gonna shut up here in a second, Mo. But
You're
but
good. This is
what I
great.
find what I find is that people like chase the money conversation. Well, acquisitions I'll make more money and startups I'm not going to make any money, and don't chase the money because I do $1 million startups. I do. I have. And I've helped doctors buy practices that weren't making much money at all. And so there's extremes in both sides. And I think you have to consider all of those things before you make the decision. So big picture, don't chase the money and kind of put yourself in the right categories of entrepreneur spirit, leader, influencer in your market. That's probably more of a startup person versus, plug and play, you know, you're really good at farming, less hunting. You're like a hunter versus a farmer. The farmer would be probably better for an acquisition. Does that kind of make
Yeah.
sense? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. So with our listeners, right? We've discussed startups versus acquisitions, and our listeners like, okay, I think this one's better for me than the other. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Is there now when you have someone that's going into owning their practice, regardless of which one, is there like a playbook or steps that you recommend for regardless of which side that say these are the next steps you need to take to jumpstart and get a good grip on owning the practice?
Either direction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, for sure. There's just some solid things that you can do just to prepare yourself for ownership in general. To me, like I didn't start Next Level Consultants right out of college or even 2 years out of college. I didn't have any experience. I didn't know what business was like. I was fumbling around, having conversations with people, trying to figure out the business world, right? So was I prepared to start a consulting firm or own my own business 2 years out of school? Hell no. Right. But, doctors, they can do the clinical stuff usually, right? Right out of college. But what are some things that might gain you some extra experience right out of school that would help you as a business owner? Well, that it would probably be save some cash going into a business, even if the bank is going to fund 100% of the practice. I would still want a reserve for myself in case my water tank blew or my car broke down or the roof caved in, whatever, right? Like having cash at home was going to make you feel better because when you own a business, it's very much like this feeling. And folks that aren't watching, like I'm waving, like waves, ups and downs,
Like fluctuating.
fluctuating. Yeah, I'm a hands guy, so folks that aren't watching, like you're missing all my hands, and I've got a stress ball. Ownership's just kind of like this, waves, ups and downs, and so to have that like cash stability on the lows is going to make you feel better as an owner. That's one. Number two, work on your clinical skills above just what you learned at school. So not only speed matters. Absolutely, speed matters, because if you go and buy a practice and someone's quicker than you, okay, and you don't really look at that, and I help people look at that before they buy. But if you go and buy a practice and the seller was quick, you're gonna drop the production day one because your hands aren't fast enough, right? So that's a challenge. So work on your speed. And even a startup, okay, we don't need to be the fastest person in the world, but even startups build up, their schedules. And so speed does matter. So speed. And then, just communication, leadership and communication. Even if you're an associate, how are you communicating? What's your personal brand? How are you dealing with conflict? I know you're not getting paid for those things yet, but it's really good practice to have a hard conversation with the front office that double booked you and there was a terrible experience, because you're going to have that same conversation as the owner. So just work on the communication and leadership, because someday you will own, and then your reputation and your brand as a leader will be on the line. And in today's day and age, holding team is very difficult if you're not a good communicator and leader. So those are the three things. How'd I do, Mo? Good?
No, I think that's good.
Yeah.
Is there, so with that too, like you said, that was like for the general, for generally both kinds. Is there anything in particular that is specific to startups versus acquisitions that you would add to that list?
Yeah. Well, okay, let's talk about startup first. Startup, I would say even more cash. So if you
Okay.
have cash, I'd want more cash. Whatever that number is, I want more of it, because startups, you're literally starting down here and you're
Hmm.
growing from zero to something. So more cash. Also be prepared to hold a part-time job. So if you absolutely hate where you work and you think that doing a startup is getting you out of that scenario, that's false. You have to maintain somewhat of a part-time job to keep the bills and the lights on at home while you're growing this other business. So if you're prepared and you kind of like where you're working and you can handle that situation, good. That's perfect for a startup. Acquisition, not so much, but sorry, bouncing around. So startup. Um, what else could you work on as a startup? Just thinking about like marketing. I think marketing is something that we all can learn from, where as an associate, if you work for one of the big groups, like we were discussing in the beginning of this show, those groups are really good at marketing and getting new patients. Learn from that, figure that out. How are those groups bringing in truckloads of people? Because as a startup, that's the name of the game: bringing people in, creating great experiences, and then hopefully getting them to refer more people in, and over and over and over. So those are probably the things for a startup. For an acquisition, to me, it's really about refining your skill set clinically. So like if I bought a practice that was just a bread and butter practice, hygiene, fillings, crowns, whatever, but if I went out to like a koi center or some kind of like, really cool implant course, now I could bring implants into a practice that's bread and butter. That's going to be a great opportunity for you. So implants and surgeries and maybe ortho, and like I would work on like your clinical ability, because if you are really skilled in a lot of things, like a super GP is what we call them, you can go into any practice and grow it if the seller isn't doing all those things. Um, Leadership is going to be even more important for an acquisition person, because you're now inheriting a team and it's fully functioning, and you're going to be you're going to have bigger teams, and all of a sudden you have no experience, and then you go to like having a 15-person team. That would be hard for
Hmm.
anybody. Whereas a startup, like you could screw up 100 times, say the wrong things, hire someone else, you're good to go. It doesn't affect the business too much. So I think for acquisition, it's about skill set with your hands, clinical, and then it's also the leadership piece of it. Those would be my big things.
So it's so interesting because I'm thinking about my own eye doctor.
Uh huh.
Um, when I became a new patient a few years ago, and I first moved to Utah, and they had the doctors had just acquired the practice. And it's so funny, like hearing you talk about like steps for being successful in an acquisition, and I've definitely seen them do that. I mean, granted, I was a new patient, so I had
Yeah.
no experience with the old staff, but I think just seeing it over the years and how, yep, we're
Yeah.
doing this and easing in and bringing in new technology. And then actually,
Yeah.
it's so funny. This last year, they finally remodeled. It was an old building. They
Yeah.
remodeled, then they changed the name, and they're like, we're
Hmm.
adding on these services. And just talking with my doctor, he's like, oh yeah, we've been planning on doing it for a while. But I think to your what you mentioned though is like you kind of got to ease in with that. Like I think if they would have made those changes right
Mm-hmm.
on, I don't think I wouldn't have been impacted because I was a new patient. But
you, yeah,
definitely some of the patients that I've seen in the office probably would have been like, how dare
yeah,
you? That's not
yeah,
okay. And it
yeah.
would have
No,
been more detrimental.
Mo, you're right, because like with acquisitions, it's so interesting. It's this interesting balance. Now we're talking about like post close, which is one
Mhm.
of my favorite topics and a little bit different than where we were headed today. But let's go with
Yeah.
this, because
Yeah, let's do it.
post close for an acquisition is really interesting, because um, if you have this machine and it's doing really well, I wouldn't change the paint on the wall. Like, just go in there, smile, earn the respect of the team. If there's things that are fundamentally issues, like with your clinical work, or maybe they're not
Mhm.
collecting up front, or just like fundamental stuff, change. Go ahead. Don't be afraid of change. I mean, anybody that listens to an acquisition specialist, consultants, you name it, everybody says, don't make any changes. Don't, like, it's okay to make a change. But
Yeah.
from a patient's perspective, I wouldn't make too many changes, and if you do, you have to have a lot of training and great communication around it. Like, not only, hey, we're collecting up front now, so just deal with it, or versus, hey, listen, we got a new financial policy. We might let you skate this time, but just expect it next time. And, just it's a little softer, right? But it's really interesting because people don't want to change anything, and that's the right thing. It's okay to make some changes, but even like the paint and the carpet, or etching the old doctor's name off of the door, just like the smallest things can freak patients out for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and even to that, it makes me laugh. So I always have to get my eyes dilated. And so when I went into this office, they had just gotten that new machine where you don't have to dilate your eyes anymore.
Yes.
And they were running a special. They're like, hey, if you get this done with your exam, you'll get a discount, all this. And so they told me that. I said, oh, yeah, absolutely. And I just remember the doctor was like, oh, really? And I was like, oh, yeah, if I don't have to have my eyes dilated 500%, I will pay whatever extra money.
Yeah.
But it was funny though, and what you're mentioning, because I
Yeah.
think he was surprised, because I think a lot of people were like, absolutely not. Like,
Not.
I will
Yes.
still have my eyes dilated,
Yes.
which I'm like crazy,
Yes.
But I think the way he did it, the way he eased into it, having
Mhm.
that little special for people and get them. And now
Yes.
I know that's like a regular part of their practice. I think if they
Yeah.
dilate your eyes, it's like option, but that's their go-to. Anyway,
Yeah.
another tangent, but that's what makes me think of too is, like
No. Yeah.
the littlest things will send people off the edge. And
It
then,
does.
you may have people like me. It's like, oh, I don't care. Take my money. It's one less stressful thing I want to do. Bring it on.
folks, Mo was a new patient, so right?
Yes,
Yeah,
there's that
like
too.
and you made a good point there, because new patients, you retrain you train patients on how you want them to be. We talk about this in consulting all the time. When you are making a change, you got to think about the strategy all the way through. But new patients, they're brand new to the practice. So like when you inherit a team, and again, goes along the lines of what we're talking about today, is when you inherit a team, they're trained to do something a certain way, and then they have trained the patients to be a certain way. So cancellation policies, financial arrangements, increasing fees, new services offered, new x-rays that you're implementing that you think are standard of care, but the other guy didn't do it right. Like all these things, the older patients are going to feel that. And so you really got to think things through. And if you do make some changes, you need some training around it, because the team, it's not like the team could just flip a switch on and just have great communication skills around something. It's not how it works. So, this is a great conversation, because it outlines the differences of startup and versus acquisition. Because a startup, it's your baby. You can make financial arrangements the way you want, the x-rays you want, the marketing you want, the conversations you want, you offer whatever you want. And every single new patient is a new patient. So
Mhm.
it's yours. It's yours to screw up. And if you screw up, oh, well, we only screwed up on the first 5 patients. Everybody else is fine. So there's that's the great thing about a startup, is they don't fail like people think they do. They don't. It's a slower ramp up, but there's a lot more room for mess up. Where in acquisition, you go in and you start messing up. That is very scary, messing up an acquisition, because it was on autopilot. You're the one that changed it. You're the one that had to have this. And next thing you know, you're dropping patients like left and right. So anyways,
No,
what else is on your agenda,
that's like
Monique?
the perfect segue to another thought I had, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like you mentioned with startups, I think for the most part, any patient you have is going to be a new patient, right? And so, like you said, you can start from day one, patient one, that training and figuring out as you go, right? And tailoring it
Mm-hmm.
to what you need.
Yeah.
And also as a startup, part of that challenge that you have that you know is like, I got to get patients in, like new patients. That's got to be part of my flow and
Yeah.
what I got to focus on. Whereas acquisitions, I'm not going to lie, my brain, right? I would never think that, oh my gosh, if I'm acquiring a practice, I need to think about new patients too. It would just be focusing on the current patients that I have. But then if you look at like my example, right? I 100%, I had no idea they were just got acquired. I was just like, listen, this place takes my insurance. There's really good reviews,
Right.
and I need an eye exam now,
Right.
coming
Right.
in. And so I feel like that might be, at least for me, it's an unseen challenge with an acquisition. Is like, not only are you maintaining your current book and easing into that, but then also you're still
Yeah.
attracting new patients,
Yeah,
whether
you have
you're
to be.
intentionally
Yeah.
or not. So how, I
Yeah.
guess in your experience, how would you advise someone on juggling that or
Oh,
figuring
heck
out
yes.
how to?
Yeah. No, I'm all over this question because, folks, don't just listen to podcasts like this and write it down and make it your Bible. Because I just said, startups need to focus on marketing, acquisitions need to focus on current patients. But if you wrote that down and lived by that, oh, don't need to worry about marketing for acquisition. That's not true. The reality is either direction has a lot of nuances and complexities. And to your point, you absolutely have to work on marketing and new patients with an acquisition, because no matter what you do, you will lose patients. You're not the other person. You're not the other guy or gal. You're not. You're just new. And if you did want to put paint on the wall, great. It probably needed it. It was disgusting, like beige color, and you wanted more light. It probably needed it, but that freaked out like, 0.5% of your patients, and they left. Fine. Goodbye. See you later. So marketing's really important to offset I always, why do I mess this? Not retentions, the opposite. But what you lose, you need to backfill with good new patients. And so heck yeah, marketing is definitely important, but it's not as important as a startup, but it's important, and every practice like has its thing. Like some really big practices, if you just focused on tightening systems, you grow the practice. If you focused on tightening hygiene and being more productive in hygiene, you grow the practice. If you add implants where the other guy didn't, you grow the practice. Sure. But if none of that happens, you do need marketing to offset what you lose. So I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, absolutely. You have to focus on marketing either way. It's just startups, you literally have no patience. Get out in the street and find somebody to come in and have a cleaning. Acquisitions, it's like, hey, we got to take care of everybody that's here. But, oh, I noticed that we lost 10 patients this month. We got to backfill that somehow.
So it sounds to me like with startups, right? Your marketing is kind of more full blast in your face, for lack of a better
Yes.
phrase. Whereas with acquisitions, it's still there, but it may kind of be more background, but hey, still noticeable because there are other things that you have to kind of coincide with that versus startups. You're starting from the ground, baby. You
It
just got to
is.
get it all out there.
Get it. Go get it. Like if you, and that, that's that other characteristic I suppose I didn't touch on is like, you have to be charismatic. You have to be willing to talk to your Uber driver about your practice, or going to a restaurant tonight, talk to the server who probably doesn't have insurance and get them on your membership plan. Like you
Yeah.
literally have to be that guy or gal. Acquisition, you're not so desperate. But again,
Yeah.
the other thing that we're being extreme to make a point here,
Sure.
Monique, but
Mm-hmm.
like I help people buy really crappy practices, even though I don't like them. It's what they want. It's the practice that's right down the road. It's cute. It's got all new ADEC and it's got all the x-rays, but the sales suck. Right. And so like I help those practices too. So, there isn't like a generic role. When I get hired, I help you put a transition plan in place so that you walk into ownership with the game plan. And marketing may be a really big game plan for this particular acquisition, whereas like a big practice, not so much. So, there isn't a general rule that fits all. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So everyone listening, that what we're talking about, it really is extremes and it's a general rule. But when, if you yourself are in that position of becoming a practice owner, it really is, it's not one size fits all. You do have to find custom fits, because you could have an acquisition that actually needs full on marketing because it wasn't done and people don't know what your practice can offer. With a startup, maybe, you blast it all at this point and it's really just kind of now starting to keep that income of those patients and now building that patient base, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm guessing that's I'm
100%.
guessing that's what you're trying to say.
You're nailing it. You're nailing it.
I'm trying.
It's perfect.
Okay, so the next part, right? This next part. Now we've talked about startups and acquisitions. We've gotten to kind of figure out the difference and the building blocks. So now, let's say we've closed the deal.
Yes.
The next part, we have to have a team, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not.
Yeah,
so how does someone start with that? Whether it's they're inheriting a team and working on collaboration with that, or building their team and building that collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Such a loaded question. I bet you have a lot of podcasts that go over this, but how do you build a team to get the results you want, whether it's existing team or a brand new startup, and you're inviting them to help you build this thing that you have in your head, startup. I think with any, decent leadership course or program or whatever, there's two things. I see trust is a key element. You got to build trust with your team. And then I think you need some vulnerability as well. I think any great leader has those two things built into getting their team to do things. So let's talk about the acquisition. So you gotta work towards trusting your team, and your team has to work towards trusting you. And how you're going to develop that trust is doing reviews with one another, probably a 30, 60, 90-day plan right out of the gate once you've closed or opened the practice. And it's really just a touch base. This is not a review. You don't want to use the word review because people associate review with money. Oh, I'm getting a raise in 30 days. No. This is just a touch base. Like, how am I doing for you, and how are you doing for me? Here's what I would like you to work on. What can I work on? And what that does is it builds a great relationship with all of your team members. And if you don't carve that out, you're missing it. And then vulnerability, and same with startup, actually, same thing. It's just with an acquisition, it's even more important because, your team drives the bus. The hygienist pre-sells dentistry. The front office collects the money and also sells dentistry. So they are really driving the bus. And if they don't have your trust, they're going to, maybe we shouldn't do that crown in this poor Mike and Mo. Like, wait, let's maybe they'll, you know what I mean? So you got to build that trust, right?
Yeah.
Right. I say vulnerability because I believe in managing through transparency. And what I mean by that is like sharing numbers, telling people where you're trying to go, what the goals are, and the why behind the goals. And so transparency is just vulnerability is just saying, hey, look, like we haven't broke even yet. Like, this is our goal, or we have to hit this number. Otherwise and then once we hit this, I'm going to bonus you. And just kind of trying to create this owner's mentality with the whole team. If you don't have trust and vulnerability, you won't get an ownership mindset with the whole team. It's just kind of like, oh, everybody thinks I'm making so much money. And I mean, I talk to doctors all the time and they're like, I don't want them to know how much money I make. I'm like, dude, they're expecting you to make money. Like, it's okay to share that our goals are X and that, a profit sharing program could be released next year if we hit this number. Like, this is all transparency. It shows some vulnerability. And then I think it also builds trust. So that's my answer. Yeah.
No, I think that's absolutely perfect. And I think also that's a great, like, those two things are great for any kind of leader across the board, whether you're a practice owner or not. And especially, here's just my thoughts. When you mention vulnerability, I think a lot of times when people hear that, they think they have to be emotional or they have to, they have to talk about feelings, and that's not it, because some people also are not like that. Like my sister, when she her job and as a leader, she is not someone who leads the emotion. She's just like very professional to the book and very clear, you know. And so I think it's being that vulnerable, like, hey, we're not doing so great on numbers right now. And I think, you know, being real with the team, and they feel that connection without you having to feel like you're out of yourself of like, oh, you know, overly emotional if that's not who you are. And so I love that, how you distinguish that, because I think vulnerability scares people.
Yes.
Because I think it's, one, no one likes being vulnerable overall. And then two, I just think it's what people associate that with and what it's not. So
thank you for saying the emotional part, because you're right. I mean, most of my clients aren't going to be breaking down in tears, but then the other extreme is some people like crying every 5 seconds. So the two extremes are not good,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, yes, I think transparency and if you lead with transparency, you need vulnerability. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, right, with if you have those intentions of, okay, this is how I'm going to be transparent and clear with my team, you can easily find that balance of that vulnerability too, you know? So even if you are somewhat maybe more emotional, you're like, okay, this is what I'm setting out. And now looking at this is how I know I can react appropriately without maybe being overly emotional and freaking everyone out. Like, oh my gosh, we're going to close tomorrow. You know?
That's right.
So I think it's taken it too. But also on the flip side, like, hey, we're kind of in like a bad place, and not being so, you know, monotone and just being like, it's like, wow, we could be out of a job tomorrow and you don't even care.
Yes.
Tonality,
the whole thing. I was thinking while you were saying that, spot on with that. I was also thinking, like, as new owners, there's like this thing where, like, I've had some clients that like are scared to say, hey, I'm a new owner. This is the first time I've dealt with something like this. Let me ask my advisors. Like, there's this thing about the younger generation of like trying to posture like they know everything. And maybe it's not the younger generation. Maybe it's just the development of folks and maturity. But like, I always tell my clients, hey, they're meeting the team for the first time, right? Imagine seller says, hey, I'm selling. It's an emotional thing. Buyer comes in, is like, hi, I'm the new owner. I'm sorry, this is scary for you, right? And they ask you a question like an HR thing, or like, and if you don't know the answer, it's totally okay to say, you know, that's a good question. I don't know. This is my first time buying a practice, but I do have a team of people, professionals that I can lean on. Let me get back to you. I will get you an answer there. That shows confidence, maturity. It shows all kinds of, so that's a perfect example of building trust right there in the moment, being vulnerable and being confident with what you know and what you don't know. And that's why you need great team members, professionals, to help you through this crazy process. Anyways, sorry, little tangent there.
That's perfect. I think with that, I think for the most part, not all, but most people know when you're in certain things, when you're going into it, you're not going to know everything. And I think just being upfront about that, they're like, okay, cool. Like, we're on the same page, versus if you're going around being like, yeah, I know everything, even though you're not, that's going to show. And then, like you said, that's not going to build trust, because it's like, all right, this person's got their feathers all in the fluff, don't know what they're doing, and they just kind of think they're better than us.
Yeah. I mean,
that's what make me think, and that does not build trust for me.
No.
At least, I don't know. Maybe it does for other people. That's not me, though.
But what it could do is you could answer a question, and then you'd have to renege on that, right? Euchre players. Maybe that's an old card game that nobody knows anymore, but you rebuttal that, and then that takes trust away, right? Yeah. And so those are some major issues that you don't want to do right away. So anyways,
no, that's good. And with that, right, I think it's the follow through. If you're gonna tell, and that's the thing too, if you're gonna tell someone like, I'm not sure, let me get back to you, make sure you do follow through.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the other part too. It's like, yeah,
trust.
It's okay if you don't admit it,
yeah.
But also if you're saying like, I'm gonna go back and check, or I'm gonna look into this, make sure you do it, because people will remember when you don't.
Yes, trust. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Well, we are almost out of time, but before I know, right? I honestly, maybe we just need to look into doing like a part 2 of this, because I think there's so much more ground that we can cover. Truly,
we'll see. Cliffhanger.
Yes. But since we are almost out of time, we like to leave our listeners with a motivational tip. So if you could take one page out of your playbook of success, what would it be?
Mine personally, or through my clients?
Whatever you want. Por qué no los dos?
Hey.
Which I said, why not both if you guys are not Spanish speakers?
I would say be okay with failure. I will give you 2 today. You're lucky. This is a big moment here. We get 2.
What a treat. Everyone listen in right now.
Let's
if you
go.
haven't
Lean
listened
in.
at all, listen right now.
Lean in. So failure, you've heard it 100 times. Same with me and my company. Fail big. Because if you don't fail, you're not going to break through. And so go fail big. And that might be getting into ownership. That might be doing a startup because your personality fits it. But you're scared about the money thing, like with the whole startup. Go fail big. Don't chase the money. Go fail big, and you're gonna come out so much bigger than you thought you would. So go fail big. And then my other thing is patience, and in that nothing will happen as quickly as you think it will. It's a journey. I'm a very motivated individual in general, and nothing over the last 20 years of my career has happened in the time frame that I thought it should. And I'm hoping that the next 20 years I'll be, let's be a little more, don't be conservative. It's just don't have such high expectations on yourself, because that's very stressful lifestyle. So those are the 2 things. Good luck with that second one, because I still haven't figured it out.
All right. So fail big and be patient.
Yes.
All right. Well, that is a wrap for today. Thank you for being with us, Michael. Much appreciated. And thank you to everyone listening. Don't forget to join the Happy Practice Playbook Facebook group, where we'll be discussing this topic more and sharing other helpful resources to help you keep your people happy. And as always, I'll be posting to get all of your tips and tricks as well. If you like what you heard today, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the next episode. We hope you'll join us next time. It's your girl, Mo Jones.